glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it. It shall be for God's people. No travelers, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there. But the redeemed shall walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The second reading is from James. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Before I get started this morning, I wanted to see if, Jacob, can you help me out a little bit? Can you tell me what you understand a wilderness is? Yeah, what would you consider a wilderness? The environment with all the animals? Is it a place where people would be? It's a place where people would be too? Yeah? Is it a small place or a big place? Big place. But there would be animals there, like wild animals? Because, you know, wild wilderness, right? Yeah? Okay. Would it be a empty place or a place like a jungle? Like a jungle? Could it also be like desert? It could be a desert too, right? All right, you're right on. So I thank you for helping me with that, because I looked it up. I noticed when the lessons were for this week that wilderness comes up in a couple of our readings. And so I wanted to kind of get an idea for wilderness, so I looked up the definition, and Jacob, you're spot on. In the dictionary, it describes it as a large tract of land largely unaffected by human activity, a vast area of barrenness, perilousness, and unchecked profusion. A wasteland, a desolate area, a wild, uncultivated, uninhabited region, which could be either a desert or a forested jungle kind of thing, and a confused or bewildering mass or collection. Now, I noticed not only in our readings today, but throughout the Bible, there are different places where wilderness seems to come into as a prominent place for people to go. And a lot of people seem to go out into the wilderness to get closer to God, to get away from some of the distractions that we have in our regular everyday life. If you'll remember, Jacob struggled all night with an angel out in the wilderness. Moses and the burning bush were out in the wilderness. The Israelites wandered for 40 years out in the wilderness. Elijah ran away to a cave out in the wilderness. And in the New Testament, John the Baptist is out in the wilderness next to the Jordan doing the baptisms in the river. And of course, after Jesus comes and is baptized by John, Jesus heads out into the wilderness for another 40 days and 40 nights. So I thought it was interesting as I was reading this description of what a wilderness is, that it can be a place that is devoid of much of anything, and also it could be a place of profusion and growth, overgrowth. I think the common characteristics of a wilderness is that it's a place where there's often few humans, few people to distract us, to get away from it all, as it were. John the Baptist may have isolated himself from others to get closer to God and to understand his place in the history of God's actions with God's people. You may remember that John the Baptist is Jesus' cousin. When the angel first appears to Mary and asks her if she'd be willing to be the mother to God's son, and she acquiesces, the angel Gabriel says, your cousin Elizabeth is already 6 months along with John the Baptist. And soon Mary goes off to be with Elizabeth. And when the two first meet each other, both of them pregnant, that's when Elizabeth says, my baby leaped at your baby coming near. And this is where we get Mary's song, the Magnificat, that we just said as part of our lessons today. My soul rejoices and magnifies the Lord. So that's where that comes from, is that time frame of those two pregnant ladies meeting, and they both have had somewhat miraculous pregnancies. Elizabeth, who was thought to be barren, Mary, who's young and unwed and hasn't been with anyone. So I wonder, as they are growing up, John and Jesus, and families get together in Jerusalem for the holy days, for the festivals, so you know they've run into each other because they're family. If they, kind of as they were growing up, kind of went off to the side and said, so how did it happen for you? What was the story around your birth? And maybe those were stories that were shared with the family about, remember when Zachariah was in the temple and, do they share those stories about how it happened? Did they know that there was something special about both of them? Did they understand the role that they were about to play? Maybe they did. Because we know when John the Baptist was at the river and started baptizing and Jesus came, that John's reaction was, whoa, wait a minute. If anyone should be baptizing anyone, you should be baptizing me, Jesus, not the other way around. And Jesus says, no, it's all right. This is the way it should go. And then Jesus heads off into the desert, and they kind of go on with their ministries over the next several days, weeks. We're not sure exactly how long in between. But now, John has said something that kind of got the king, Herod, upset, and he's been thrown in jail. And it could be that John is anticipating Jesus will be the kind of Messiah along the lines of David. And that's what many of the Jews were waiting for. They were waiting for a warrior king, someone who's going to come, overthrow Rome, and reestablish the Israel kingdom, and go back to those days of prosperity and power when they were recognized as a force in the region. So they're kind of waiting for this person who's going to rally the troops and go after Rome and kick them out. And it may be that John was thinking along those lines, because he sends his followers to Jesus to say, so, are you the one, or should we wait for someone else? In other words, Jesus, are you going to do something here, or is this it? Are you really the one? Because we're not seeing a lot of action here. And Jesus sends his followers back and says, you tell John this. The description of what the Messiah would do in the Old Testament prophecies is that there would be healings, that the lame would walk, that the deaf would hear, the mute would speak, the blind would see, those that were sick or ill would be cured. That's what you're going to see out of the Messiah. And those things are the things that I'm doing. So yes, I am the one. And after he sends off the followers back to John, he turns to the crowd. And he asks the crowd, he says, what exactly was it that you went out into the wilderness to see? He says, was it something as common as Mother Nature? A reed blowing in the wind? No, that wasn't it. He says, did you go out there to see some fancy know-it-all? He says, no, rich people, they're in the palaces. They're not out in the wilderness. He says, so what did you go see? Did you go see a prophet? Yes, and more than a prophet. And he talks about how John the Baptist is greater than the prophets of old because he is the one who is sent to prepare the way for the Messiah, to announce the coming of the Messiah. He's been given a special task. This is the Elijah person that they are anticipating, the person that announces the Messiah is to come. That's who John the Baptist is. And then Jesus throws in this one-liner that's typical of Jesus. He gives us something to think about. And he says, yet even the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John the Baptist. Even the least. And who's he talking about? Who is this least in the kingdom of heaven? Is he talking about the angels? I don't think so. Is he talking about the saints in light, those that have already died in the faith that have gone ahead of us? No, I don't think so. Jesus is talking about us. You see, John the Baptist, because he is the one that announces, he's been thrown in jail, and we know that in the other stories about John, he's going to be beheaded soon. He doesn't get to see the culmination of Jesus' life. He doesn't see the cross because he dies before that. We who come after, we who have come after Jesus' cross, Jesus' death, we are the ones who know the promises of God fulfilled. We know Jesus' life, his death, and his resurrection. We are the least of those in the kingdom because we know that we have seen God's love personified and nailed to the cross for each one of us. So we who know this, we now take on John the Baptist's mantle. We are the one who is sent ahead. We are the ones that are sent to prepare the way. We point to Jesus in all of our wilderness places in this life. In the wilderness of our business and school, work and play. In the wilderness of troubled times of hardship and sickness and distress and suffering and grief. In the wilderness of desolation, despair, and loneliness. In the wilderness of the profusion of confusion and doubt and denial. In our wilderness of crowded streets and poverty and crime. In the wilderness of our borderlands, of desperate refugees and asylum seekers. In the wilderness of prejudices and fears and hatreds. In the wilderness of lies and fake news and division. In all of our various places of wilderness, you and I now take up John's calling to be the messenger sent ahead to prepare for Jesus, prepare the way for his coming. Jesus, who brings love and healing and togetherness and grace to all who will come to him with open hearts. In another week or so, one of the songs that we will be singing has these lyrics. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing.